Welcome back to the Intelligent Builder podcast, sponsored by Plutus Agents. Today, I'm joined by Sue Addison and Jefferson Schierbeek, the husband and wife team behind AddisonSchierbeek Architects. They're a Los Angeles studio known for human-centered homes and thoughtful role models, and for guiding clients through LA's maze of approvals and budgets with a values-driven process they call connection, collaboration, and curiosity. We'll dive into the firm they've built together, how they've evolved, and where residential design is headed. Jefferson, Sue, it's great to have you both on.
Hi, nice to
Thank
be
you.
here.
Of course, yeah. So could you start us off with kind of a quick origin story? From my understanding, from my last conversation with Jefferson, you moved to LA, you met a young couple who needed an architect and decided to open your own shop. So could you kind of run us through the first maybe 1 to 2 years there?
You want to go first?
Yeah, it did happen, maybe not that quickly. We were both working with people who had come out of Frank Geary's office for a year or so, and it was great. It was exciting. There was a wonderful network of young architects in LA that seemed to kind of, I don't know, it was just a really vibrant time, I think, in architecture in LA. So we started off doing that, and through that met a lot of people and kind of developed a community. And then eventually these friends approach us about building a house for them. You know, we still kind of worked both with other architects and doing our own projects for a few years. But that was the beginning. It was probably around 1995, I think, when we first started doing our own work.
Awesome. Well, I would really like to know, well, first of all, that makes a lot more sense. That story kind of comes together a little bit better. But I would like to know how your strengths kind of complement each other. So, Sue, I know you've kind of described your design approach as more humanistic and community anchored, while Jefferson, you've framed your career around, I guess, curiosity. So, where do you say that kind of overlaps day to day?
The way that we run our practices is both parallel and individual in an interesting way, that each of us has projects that they lead, the other supports them, both in an advisory sense and kind of input. But we do have a tendency to probably have skill sets that are, maybe I'm a little bit more about construction and buildability, and Sue's a little bit more about the idea generation and kind of what one might call the fun part of architecture. So, but I think we both have strengths in both sides and then complement each other in how we work together on projects. We've been obviously working together for a fair number of years, and we have established certain patterns of how we communicate and get along, and then rely on each other for certain aspects of the process.
Cool. And you've kept your team pretty small, right?
Yeah. Over the years, we've had 1 or 2 people at times in the office, but early middle of my career, I was approached by an entrepreneurial gentleman who was saying that he was seeing outsourcing as an interesting idea. So I joined him as a partner in an outsourcing firm, and as one of the parallel many things we've done, we started a group that did production work for architects and engineers in the United States. And we took on venture capital, and we were in our Series C round when we were approached by an Indian engineering firm called Neosoft. And rather than invest in us, they actually bought us out. So they absorbed us into their company. And so we operated that way for a little while. But in that process, we learned and met many outsourcing groups in India and in South America. And so when we went back to doing our own work, we kept working with those folks. So we have 2 very, very long-standing relationships with outsourcing groups in India, and 1 long-standing relationship with a group in South America. And we use them as our production arm. So we have some consultants that we work with here that support us more locally in project management roles and things like that. But otherwise, our production and rendering and things like that are all Indian and South American based.
Oh, that's super, super interesting. So really it's kind of just both of you, other than the overseas outsourcing, like you two kind of really work together to make things happen.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a small team of people, that work consulting. So we do have more people, but really the bulk of our work gets done in the outsourcing.
Yeah, the
Awesome.
bulk
That's
of it.
super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about your emphasis on those values of connection, collaboration, and curiosity? Can you kind of give me maybe an example of where those values have changed a client decision, maybe around scope, budget, or schedule?
For that
Boy,
one?
that's a good
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
I mean, I sort of see, I'm going to back up just a little bit, but I sort of see the process as being somewhat iterative. We have a tendency to come into the process asking a lot of questions. And I think in sort of vetting a project scope and developing a program for the design, we often tend to question some of the expectations that clients come in with, in which case we're starting sort of from a fresher perspective. Not to say we don't recognize what they want in the long run, but I think starting that way gives us the ability to question the outcome as we go along and as the project develops. And I think in that way, I sort of see it. I think we work somewhat collaboratively with our clients to build something that not only reflects what they want and how what they want can be executed, but also giving them time to sort of process what they're asking for and what components going into a project affect the outcome, if that makes sense. So I think for sure the collaboration aspect of it is what we use to help really build from beginning to end.
yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that,
So you,
yeah, I mean, just to add on to it, I think we all understand that we are all connected and in multiple ways, socially and economically and in the places that we live. And we're always very careful and kind of conscious of making those things what impact a project, even above and beyond just the personal connections within families, within relationships, within the greater sort of communities that we try to place our buildings.
Right.
yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So you approach it first out of curiosity and like learn from your prospect or client, and then you build the connection as you go and continue to collaborate the entire process.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And I think connection too, really ultimately, because we do so much residential work that ultimately each project is really rooted in a neighborhood. And it really extends beyond just the project site in terms of recognizing, priorities for projects. So in that way too, I think that is part of the connection process.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned neighborhood, which reminds me of the kind of community investing you've both done as well. So you kind of co-created the Ocean Charter School, right? And then you've done some teaching and some civic projects. So what or how has that shaped kind of the firm's culture and experience, would you say?
I think that the starting of the charter school was just probably an occurrence because we're architects in a way. And when we see a challenge and something that, takes a skill set of looking at all the various and disparate things and bringing them together, it happened. And it happened because Sue was bold enough at a community meeting at another school to raise her hand and say, hey, why don't we try doing this charter school? And so it started at our kitchen table just almost by serendipity. But I think that the skill sets that we bring to it about community and about having an impact, and I think we were very conscious about thinking about the long-term impact for our children. And it was a group of people that were really enthusiastic about an educational pedagogy based on the Waldorf. And it was a wonderful time. And I think the school's been in operation now for, is it 20 years?
Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's really cool.
It's interesting because I think that, like Jefferson was saying, the process of starting that was kind of like the process of starting a project, really. And I think, for us, even though a lot of the specific skills involved in building the school were not necessarily our strongest skills, there were plenty of people in the group who had those skills.
It was hundreds
Yeah.
of people were involved. And so collaboration was probably the most important thing
Yep.
because there were so many skill sets that were needed to make what happened happen. And it all lined up at the right time in the right place, having the people show up that needed to show up. And so it was just a wonderful adventure.
Yeah, kind of branching off the collaboration and the skills that are required to build it up with everybody around you. That and just experiences alone definitely shape how you would run the business in general. So I can see that there's definitely a connection there. And Jefferson, I remember you kind of mentioned your father was a builder, right? So
hmm
how did that experience and maybe the habits you learned from him, how does that kind of guide how you run your business now?
You know, I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that question, which is really pretty interesting. My father, I think, was a pretty fantastic builder, but he was not. He just built homes for people and went about his work. He was quite workmanlike in what he did, but very meticulous and very thoughtful about it. I think he was a fairly social beast in the process, so I think he did quite well in that. And I think that probably his critical eye as to what and why you're doing what you're doing, but at the same time, understanding, because as a builder, much like the way that I think we practice architecture, it's not about what we want to do. It's what our clients want us to do with them and for them. We do, I think I don't want to say that we aren't without our creative impulses and seeing things that we think are pretty special and fantastic and offering those to our clients. But at the same time, we're a little bit more workerly in our application of making sure that it's done the way that everybody wants it to be done, so that there's satisfaction in builders, clients, subcontractors, and everybody else that gets involved with the process.
Yeah, and then all goes back to collaboration too,
Yeah.
just like making sure that both you and the client understand each of your perspectives and you can kind of come to an agreement and work together.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I think that one of the skills that brings into our office is that Jefferson is able to speak that language. I think in a way that bridges a gap that can sometimes be more adversarial between architects and contractors. It's kind of been really useful over the years that he can speak that language.
Yeah, definitely. Like being able to kind of build the relationships, the different types of relationships is super
Right.
key. What about maybe a painful lesson that kind of forced you to change processes, or maybe from like an client education standpoint or a pre-construction design thing? What did you implement so that mistake wouldn't happen again?
I think,
But
yeah, painful lesson is an everyday, ongoing, and wonderful example of interacting with building codes. And in the current situation with the Palisades and the sort of optimism of the city and the challenge of the clients and what we're dealing with, it's fascinating to go in every day and try to go, okay, how is this going to be interpreted? Because there's a lot of unique situations that we're finding ourselves in. And so we're trying, I think that's painful for us, because we do have clients that want to think and we want to be the experts in what the code says. And up to the drastic thing that happened in January, we felt like we were pretty on top of that. And we find ourselves in a really interesting position of nobody really knows sometimes, and there's a lot of new information that's coming out. So being open-minded and being positive about it is probably a lesson that we're learning every day.
yeah, I think also to add to that, like not taking interaction with the building department for granted, to really ask a lot of questions and not assume anything, because there are many people in that bureaucracy and they are given some leeway in how they translate the code. So you get different answers from different people, and it's a constant um, a constant process of navigation and communication. And it's not easy. But again, I think the biggest takeaway is don't take anything for granted and continue asking questions.
Yeah, definitely. I bet you can learn a lot from talking to those people in the building codes and compliance departments too. And staying open-minded is definitely good in terms of being in LA, where I know that can bottleneck a lot of projects. So actually kind of going along with that, where might timelines slip most often because of those bottlenecks? And what do you do to kind of de-risk upfront for clients?
Probably the biggest de-risking is an interesting question, or a sort of way of stating it. I think it's more informing appropriately so that everybody's as aware as possible. I think one of the there are two major hitches in the architectural communication early on process. One is time and one is budget. Trying to be as forthright and honest about what those things are, both for the architect and the client. And then once builders are brought on board, trying to keep those two things moving forward. I don't think there's a lot of risk if everybody is actually aware of what those things truly are. I know that in the current time, we're seeing a huge fluctuation in economic sort of drivers from multiple reasons. That we saw prices skyrocket for a little bit of time on sort of cost per square foot, but I think that was more a nervous preparedness for what the future might hold. And I don't think the future is quite playing out the way that some people thought, but I'm not sure we're seeing numbers go back to where they were pre-fire. But um, those conversations, I think we to the best of our ability never want to have a client or anybody involved in our projects be surprised by something. You can't avoid it always, but minimizing surprise rather than risk is probably what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think by being, going back to the process being somewhat iterative, more you bring, like, I think we've had enough experience where eventualities that can occur later in the projects are always in the back of our mind. So whenever we're having conversations, even early in the design process, those experiences or potential roadblocks are always part of the conversation from an early point in any project.
Yeah, keeping the open communication and like earlier, the open-mindedness too with what could possibly go wrong and always having that in the back of your mind just in case to kind of pre-prepare for it in a way. But you spoke about iteration again, and I know since you've been in business for, almost 3 decades, you've kind of gone through like the hand drawing, AutoCAD, Revit, and stuff like that. So I remember also, Jefferson, you talked about kind of pressure testing AI in design, and it didn't really work out too well for you. But where has tech actually been saving time for a boutique studio like you guys, and where does it still just noise?
Well, I think that the production team, at least our drawing group, that's where we save time, because with working on computers, you can develop templates, you can start working on construction documents while you're building design, you can start layering the process a bit more. So I think in that sense, and working 3D and being able to move people through a model, an electronic model versus having to build everything by hand, there's a lot of time savings in that once you have the electronic models built and you can manipulate them. The AI part of it, I'm not sure we found.
Well, we dabble with AI. We found, and I told you, Owen, we tried a couple of things that are about design, but currently right now it's mostly about words. Words seem to be a good place to leverage AI for us, but we're seeing some interesting, obviously, opportunities with what people are doing. I think, I think we'll be practicing for a little bit longer here, but I'm not sure we're going to make it to AI taking our place. And maybe that can't happen anyways. So I think that what we do leverage, and I think Sue's absolutely correct, we leverage that, particularly using an outsourcing sort of offshore production model. We obviously are hugely dependent on the internet, hugely dependent on the technology. We have Revit. We know how to use Revit, but we are not the Revit drivers. So we let our team do the Revit driving. And we use things like Bluebeam and other types of markup tools that are just, for us, just every day, all day long. That's how we communicate.
Yeah. I can say that AI has been sometimes useful in research, like for code specifics, like if you get multiple sources on specific questions or, wanting to find out about context for a project, or so it can be useful with that, but then with the understanding that it's only as good as the information it has, you can't necessarily rely on it completely. I mean, I'm not to a point where I completely trust a completely AI-driven research process.
We were involved with a recent panel that they had put together, and it was sort of ad hoc, where the Archistar folks were talking about implementing some pre-planning work and also some building plan check work. And it was pretty fascinating. A group of people that are all kind of early in doing the projects up in the Palisades, and it's not yet, I know it's there and it's available. We tried it and it gave us some information that wasn't exactly spot on. So in double checking it, realized that it wasn't quite there, but I'll bet it's like everything else. It's a minute away. I mean, if it's not this afternoon, it's tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah. I mean, I think the structure of it is kind of going in the right direction.
Mhm.
Just, it was something for the Palisades that we're working on, and it just wasn't useful for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun to
Yeah.
dabble in it too, just to kind of like play around with it and see what you can get. I don't think it'll ever replace
Yeah.
you or architects, but it is super interesting though, its application to architects and architecture. I just read an article by AIA the other day, and it's was kind of saying how AI is more usable in architecture as like a thinking partner. So kind of like you were saying, for research and for copywriting too, if you're doing blogs and stuff like that. I was just speaking to an architect last week, just Thursday, about how AI can be like a blog engine. Like it can help you kind of get your name out there a little bit rather than doing, advertising and stuff
Right.
like that. So there's definitely applications for it, and it's always going to be evolving, like you said. So you never really know in the future
Right.
where
I mean,
that'll go.
ultimately, I suspect it'll make our lives a lot easier in driving projects forward. But, if that is an option for us right now, we don't really have the tools to use it that way. But, I suspect that, if you can just talk to your computer and it understands you and generates something based on that, then, that would be lovely, but we're not quite there.
Yeah, it can be hard to trust, but it definitely can speed up processes if done the right way. But before I ask about some of your goals and some of your future outlook, I haven't asked yet, who's your ideal client today? And like, what's kind of your favorite
Oh,
job to
wow.
take on?
That is a good. I I mean, I can say like one of the higher priorities would be that they're curious and interested and open to ideas and, appreciative of certain architectural elements that can elevate a project and make it even more than just functional, but inspirational. So I think when people come in with that sort of frame of mind, it gets us excited and it makes for a more enjoyable process, I think, from beginning to end.
We've gone through this idea of having a client avatar and a perfect client, and we've gone through this exercise many, many times. And I think that we're a little bit old school in that I think that we like all different kinds of people. We are specialists in residential work. We tend to, I think, work best when somebody realizes that maybe where they are living or where they're intending to live doesn't quite fit with their lifestyle. So you may call that a challenge. You may call that a problem. You may call it an opportunity. All of those things. I think we're here, I think, to help people understand those things and then try to solve problems. Try to make something that sort of transcends just a common place to live to something that sort of embraces sort of a higher purpose or a higher sense of what living can be about.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we do have projects where, in hindsight, the client will say, I love my home. I love living here. And that it's like if we knew which clients we were getting at the beginning who would say that at the end, that would be great. We don't always know that. But I do think it starts with a certain level of open-mindedness and kind of curiosity, not to overuse that.
Yeah, no, I get you. That's a very unique answer. I like that answer a lot. Everyone always kind of has like a very super specific job type or like
Yeah.
customer type that they like. So I like that you kind of take a more personality based approach to it in a way. So let's talk about kind of your goals for this upcoming year. We'll say 2026. So what needs to happen in the next 12 months to call that a win for the
I'm gonna
firm?
leave that one to you.
Yeah, we have different ideas on what Addison Schierbeek may or may not be, as we are. And I'm starting to say this a little more often as we are getting toward the end of running this. I think that 2026 will be successful if we just keep, a little bit of work coming in the door and we have satisfied and happy clients and we enjoy coming to work every day. We're not, I think if you asked me that question 5 years ago, I was thinking that we would try to grow a little bit and maybe get a few more people in here. I think I've reached a point, and we've not really had the longer discussion, but it's like, I think we're pretty comfortable where we are. And I think we're going to do this for another, I think I'm going to do it for another 5 to 10 years. She may have a different answer for that. So we probably should have a better answer about, KPIs and targets and revenue goals and number of projects. But we, I think we're going to be, I think 2026 is going to be good. I'm pretty optimistic. We actually felt a pretty good slowdown through COVID. When COVID happened, we had a couple of good-sized projects that carried us through, as well as remodeling our own home. So we had plenty to do, but we saw a really good uptick and now sort of a leveling off, as it were. So I think I'm optimistic, but I know there's a lot of slowing that's happening. So
Yeah. It's a little hard to track the market in terms of how much work we expect to have. But even just recently, we've had a few interesting projects come in that I was like, that's a breath of fresh air. There's just something a little uplifting. And I think I would call the year a success if, we maintain a high percentage of our work that brings us satisfaction as well as the client, and keeps us inspired and asking questions and challenging ourselves in ways that feel really productive.
mhm.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm really liking both of your answers to some of these questions because I asked pretty similar questions. I mean, different wording, but everyone always gives more generalized answers. But I like yours because that's all you can really hope for, especially when you're kind of getting towards the end of your journey. It's just satisfaction and just
Yeah.
being comfortable with what you're doing. So I love that. That's awesome. I'll ask you one more question for today. So for a small architecture firm that's maybe starting today, the owner starting today, what's the shortest path you would advise them towards trust with clients and with trade partners?
There was one thing that I thought the question was going toward that I wanted to sort of do a shout out for. I belong to a group called Entrez
Go for
Architect
it.
and Mark R. LePage's group for uh, more than 10 years now, and it's been around for, I think, 14 or 15 years. I would think for client or for architects, if you're a small architect and you're looking for something that is advantageous to that, that's a growing group of people that are running small practices. And I think that one of the interesting things that we have is us as a partnership to bounce ideas off and to test things and to talk about how clients are interacting and things like that. How you get a shorter version to the client or how you make that process. That's a really interesting question. And I think that we ask ourselves every day with the marketing that we do. It's pretty humble. We have an Instagram account. We have a Facebook account. We try to be diligent at putting something up there at least once a week that basically is either about what we're doing or about the things that we're enjoying or things that we admire. And it's really just about having a voice in the conversation. We're not very good at proactively promoting, as it were, even if it's in an offering of our sort of experience and ideas, but we try. So I think that there are a couple of people that are very successful at marketing because marketing in the social media era has changed so much that I don't want to use the term younger people, but it seems like the younger people and the people that are more there's so much that happens now on your phone and on the computer and on the internet. And obviously things like this podcast, 10 years ago, this really barely existed, if at all. And now you're in a marketplace that's just very popular. There's lots of these things going on. So doing a podcast is probably a really good idea if you had the bandwidth to do that.
I have to say, I mean, I'm not sure I completely understood the question if this is about marketing but in all the years we've been doing this, some of our most successful marketing has really been word of mouth from clients, and we've gotten great projects that way. And if anything, I think recognizing that and taking advantage of it, which we have. I mean, we always refer back to clients who are really pleased and happy in their homes, and yeah.
Yeah, so kind of for a new firm really to build authority, but in a way of just kind of being known and being out there as much as you can be, but just doing good work so you
Yeah.
can get more
Just keep
clientele.
working. Yeah, doing things. But I do think your group for a young person, is a really good connection.
But if you have a good idea how to get faster to clients or how to build a clientele, that I think there's a very hungry audience for that too, because there's lots of different pathways to that everybody's looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always going to be huge. Marketing is like the number one thing that you could be doing to get any kind of business. So yeah, and with AI too, that's just even better now. Awesome. Well, Jefferson and Sue, thank you very much. This was a fantastic conversation. I loved a lot of your answers. That was amazing. So we'll wrap it up here. But before we close out, where should people connect with either of you? Maybe website or LinkedIn?
Probably easiest to just email us. We do have a website. It's AddisonSchierbeek.com. And from there, you can connect us through, I think there's a project inquiry page, but also our emails are just, I'm Jefferson at AddisonSchierbeek.com. She's Sue, but it's just SU at AddisonSchierbeek.com. I don't know if you have show notes or anything like that, but you can definitely put those in the show notes.
And all of that's on our website.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'll link the website below, so it's super easy to get to. But for the audience, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and share with another builder or founder in your circle. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Intelligent Builder. Thank you, guys.